Less than 3 weeks from Election Day, one of the two candidates for president is currently awaiting sentencing on 34 felony criminal convictions. Now, you might recall Donald Trump paid adult film actress Stormy Daniels, you see there, $130,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement 11 days before the 2016 election. So voters would not hear her story of having an adulterous affair with Trump shortly after his third wife, Melania, gave birth to their son. When Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, exposed that Trump laundered the payments through his business to disguise them, Trump was criminally prosecuted for fraud. 34 felony charges, 34 convictions. Now, the former president is due to be sentenced in late November after the election. And now, just days away from the 2024 election, Rachel Maddow has brand new reporting that Donald Trump has once again been trying to make a deal to keep Stormy Daniels quiet. Rachel Maddow is here with me tonight with a special report. Rachel.
Chris, yeah, I'm as bewildered by this as you are. Thank you for the chance to break this story here. I don't know why I am surprised that this is happening. I will admit to being a little bit bewildered by it, as well as a little bit shocked by it, even though none of us should be shocked by anything. But let me lay it out for you. So, as you mentioned, and as we all know, Trump was convicted earlier this year, 34 felonies, after he paid Stormy Daniels to be quiet. He paid her 11 days before the 2016 election to not talk about her, what she described as her unpleasant experience having sex with him. He paid her so voters would not know about that when they went to vote in 2016. Well, now we have just learned, we have reported out 20 days, here it is, 20 days before this election, we can report that he is once again trying to pay Stormy Daniels to be quiet ahead of this next election. Here's how we came to it. After Stormy Daniels testified in Trump's criminal trial earlier this year, where Trump was convicted, you might remember she came and did kind of a blockbuster interview here on MSNBC. And in anticipation of that interview, expecting that it might have a big impact, Ms. Daniels set up a GoFundMe to try to crowdfund some of the hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees that she still owed to Trump at the end of the multiple legal cases she had ended up in with him, including, you might remember, an ill-fated defamation case that was filed by her now imprisoned lawyer. Anyway, big mess. She owed him hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that GoFundMe actually did raise enough money for her to pay it off, which is a very big deal for her. That's a life-changing thing. So she's got the money to pay him off. She does owe him the money. Her lawyers start having a back and forth with Trump's lawyers about finalizing the exact amount of the payment. And there is a little arithmetic and negotiation that has to happen there. For example, there's interest that accrues on the original amount. So the two sides have to work out how long it's been accruing interest and what the exact amount down to the penny will need to be paid depending on which exact day you pay. I mean, it's normal for there to be some back and forth about that. It's normal for there to be some disagreement. Trump's side at one point was demanding around $652,000. Stormy Daniels' side was saying they thought it should be closer to $600,000. So they had to work all this out. At this point, Stormy Daniels is looking forward to having it all over and done with, bringing the whole saga with her and Trump to a close. When it comes time for Stormy Daniels' lawyer to call her and give her the final amount, she decides to film the call. Because this is a big moment in her life, right? She's expecting to hear from her lawyer on this call. Stormy, here's the amount. We've agreed. We're sending the wire tomorrow. And then congratulations, Stormy. It is done. You're officially done. Donald Trump is out of your life. She is expecting this to be a cinematic moment, a big deal in her life. And so she decides to film it. Phone rings. She puts it on speakerphone and she films it. But what her lawyer is calling to tell her is not what she's expecting. Watch.
What we're going to see in the future. That's no way. No, I can't let you do that. So he's like, okay, I got to get back with him, So they want to cut some kind of deal where they silence you.
Don't they know that won't work?
It's not going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen.
We had to bleep a little swearing there. But what her lawyer tells her is they want to cut some sort of deal where they silence you. In the midst of this negotiation over paying off the last legal settlement between them, Trump is trying to get another hush money deal with Stormy Daniels ahead of this election. Trump's lawyer basically offered to take it off the bottom line. They would pretend that Stormy Daniels owed less money to Trump than they actually believed she owed if she also signed an agreement to not talk about Trump. You know, when he paid her $130,000 in hush money before the 2016 election, that turned into 34 felony convictions for Trump because a jury found that he illegally laundered those payments through his business to cover it up. This time, they were apparently planning to launder the new hush money payment to Stormy Daniels through the payment of a legal judgment. Now, we know that because of this call. We also know because Ms. Daniels' lawyer has provided us the documents that show how it happened, and I can show you those in print. In this email we obtained from Stormy Daniels' attorney, we've redacted the street addresses and email addresses and phone numbers. Those are our redactions, but this is otherwise exactly what was sent. And I'll read it directly. Dear Clark and Allison, who are Stormy Daniels' lawyers, we disagree that a payment of $620,000 would be in full satisfaction of the three judgments. However, quote, we can agree to settle these matters for $620,000, provided that your client agrees in writing to make no public or private statements related to any alleged past interactions with President Trump or defamatory or disparaging statements about him, his business, and or any affiliates, or his suitability as a candidate for president. So we'll take less than we believe she owes, more than $30,000 less than we were previously demanding, if Stormy Daniels signs an agreement right now to not talk about Trump, to not talk about having sex with him before, which is what we paid her for before, and to not say anything bad about him now running for president. Stormy's lawyer repeatedly said no to her signing any kind of NDA. You saw her natural reaction in the moment saying, no way. So he said no to any kind of NDA. And then look at this, Chris. He gets this email from Trump's lawyer. Quote, I just spoke to my client, that would be Donald Trump, and co-counsel. Case can be settled for $635,000. No mention of an NDA. So the way this goes is, hey, we think she owes $650,000. Okay, we'll take $620,000 if she also signs an NDA. No to the NDA? Okay, fine, I've spoken to Trump. Then it's going to be $635,000. Stormy's attorney tells us they finally settled on $627,500, which is what Stormy paid, and she never signed anything. Now, I will tell you, we sent questions about all of this to Trump's Florida attorney who was handling these negotiations. He did not reply. He forwarded our email to the Trump campaign. They gave us a response instead. Their response was quite unexpected. They told us, oh, these documents are part of the Iranian hacking. Quote, these purported documents were attained as part of an illegal foreign hacking attack against President Trump and his team. We are working with authorities to determine the legal repercussions for those likely committing federal offenses by posting and utilizing stolen material by terror regime adversaries. Ms. Daniels has been held to account by having to pay President Trump over and above the money she owes to him as a result of her wrongdoings. Now, parts of that statement are factually and sort of legally inexplicable, but that is what they told us. We went back to them again saying thanks, but asking them about the hush money demand specifically. They just reiterated that statement. As I said, we got these communications straight from Stormy Daniels' lawyer after speaking with Stormy Daniels herself. There was no hacking involved. We did not get them from any hack or from the leaking of any hacked documents. There was a breach of the Trump campaign recently. Last month, the Justice Department indicted 3 Iranians for hacking into the Trump campaign back in May, stealing emails and documents and then trying to shop them to the media and to the Biden campaign. Some emails between Trump's lawyers and Stormy's lawyers from these negotiations did just recently turn up online in a report on Substack. Stormy Daniels and her lawyer both told us they know nothing about that. But we didn't get them from any Iranian hacking operation or any leak of any Iranian hacked materials. And so putting the Iranian hacking diversion to the side and their threats about it and stuff, the bottom line here is the Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump, is currently awaiting sentencing for crimes involving a secret hush money payment he made to porn star Stormy Daniels just before the 2016 election to keep her from talking about him and specifically about having sex with him. And now, just before the 2024 election, Trump has once again demanded that Stormy Daniels sign on to an agreement not to talk about him, offering to knock thousands of dollars off her bill if she did it. And, you know, maybe this time Trump has learned his lesson about not laundering this through his business. But he really is basically trying to do the same thing again. I should also tell you, Chris, just one last point. We did contact the New York District Attorney's Office about this. That's the office that prosecuted Trump on the initial hush money case. And they had no comment for us on this matter.
I'm processing a lot here. So first of all, Stormy Daniels paid Trump what she owed. She did not sign, in the end, any kind of agreement to keep silent. So just on that part,
yes.
Is that it's done? She's in the clear?
Yes, she did not sign any NDA, and her lawyer and she both made clear to us she never would. But there may be another piece of this, which is that since Ms. Daniels refused to sign this new NDA for Trump, she tells us that she believes her social media and online presence has been sort of mysteriously torpedoed. In other words, she feels that after she refused to sign his agreement to keep quiet, she was effectively quieted anyway online with what she feels is some kind of artificial throttling or false reporting of posts and mentions about her. I can tell you that at least one club promoting one of her recent stand-up comedy shows has expressed similar concerns. And we are looking into it now using a lot of different tactics and techniques, talking to a lot of different sources. We may have more reporting on that part of it in days ahead, Chris.
There's a few things that are fascinating to me. And one of them is, it just seems like the horse is out of the barn here. Like, is it just, I mean, he's like the Terminator of NDAs, I guess. He just like really wants NDAs all the time, all over the place. But like, we do know all know the story. And what I think my main takeaway from this is, for whatever people say about this story, oh, it's priced in, people know that he's a philanderer, blah, 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 they certainly act as if it is harmful to him politically, both in 2016 and now.
What else does Donald Trump pay for out of his own pocket? Thousands of dollars. I mean, with all the information that we have about the contractors that he's stiffed and the small businesses that he's stiffed, his campaign still has hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills for small towns hosting Trump campaign rallies, right? I mean, he doesn't pay for anything, but he has repeatedly shown himself willing to dig into his own pocket to pay significant amount of money specifically to stop Stormy Daniels from talking. In advance of elections, he is willing to dig in and pay when he will not pay for anything else. And this means that it's important to him. And I don't know exactly why it's important to him. He continues to deny that they had any sort of sexual relationship. I think that the veracity of her testimony in his criminal case on these matters sort of speaks for itself along those lines in terms of who you're going to believe. But he is apparently still in 2024 right now willing to pay money to keep her from talking about him. And that is a very unusual thing. And I shouldn't be shocked, but I am.
And we begin tonight with less than 3 weeks left on the campaign trail and two campaigns that could not be any more different. We have Vice President Kamala Harris sending a unity message of country before party versus Donald Trump, who puts himself before country. And it is because her opponent is Donald Trump, unfit, unhinged, and anti-democratic, that Kamala Harris is making inroads into a broad coalition that we have not seen really in the 21st century. A coalition of Democrats, independents, and Republicans united for democracy and united against Trump. Moments ago, Harris even ventured into the hostile television territory for the first interview that she's had thus far on Fox. Though the first portion of the interview is entirely about immigration, the vice president managed to wrestle away from migrant crisis fear-mongering to address the stakes of this election.
Are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people. You and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
The vice president may not be the first Democratic candidate to appear on Fox, but her message to Republicans is resonating with big names across the aisle. Today, more than 100 Republicans stood alongside her in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia, as she delivered a strong rebuke of her opponent.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged. Anyone who has called for the, quote, termination of the Constitution of the United States, as Donald Trump has, must never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States.
This type of crossover appeal within our two major political parties is extremely rare. You had the Reagan Democrats, white male Democrats motivated by social conservatism, who defected in the presidential elections of the 1980s to vote for the Republican candidate. Reagan Democrats were such a decisive phenomenon, there's still a mythical quality to them, something to be debated and studied. It's not like you hear the term Bush Democrats or Obama Republicans or Republicans for Clinton. I mean, can you imagine? You know what you do hear, though, these days? Republicans for Kamala. It's a result of her message and commitment to unity, something her opponent has no interest in. In a Fox town hall in battleground Georgia, Trump appeared before an audience of all women because, you know, hosting an adjudicated rapist for an all-woman town hall is exactly what Fox would greenlight. From this town hall, Trump doubled down on his Hitler talking points about the enemy from within.
It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, you know, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick and they're so evil.
Turns out Trump's enemies from within aren't undocumented immigrants, as his followers want you to think. I see you, Glenn Youngkin. Those enemies are actually Democrats elected by the people who happen to disagree with him. Dictator much? Joining me now is David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman, and Robert P. Jones, president of the Public Religion Research Institute. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I do want to start with you, David, because, you know, I just was making a couple notes as I was listening there. You had in Bucks County, Pennsylvania today, the former lieutenant governor of Georgia. We had our friend Olivia Troy, who worked in the Trump administration. You had Adam Kinzinger, very conservative Republican former congressman. You had Vice President Harris praising Mike Pence and saying, but for him, we might not still have our democracy. And then there was the literal physical embrace of the two people who introduced her. This couple who were longtime, lifelong Republicans. The husband had voted twice for Donald Trump. They were a couple that had a farm, so they're rural folks.
That's right.
And it strikes me that part of what Vice President Harris is doing, including in that Bret Baier interview, is saying that part of the way to bring the country together is a literal physical embrace of people who, for a lot of Democrats, are an anathema, people who voted for Donald Trump. But she's saying, no, you could have worked for him. You could have voted for him. You could have voted for him twice. You're still my people, and I will even go to your favorite network and argue on your behalf.
Joy, I love to see Vice President Harris in this environment because, for one, strategically, there are very few gettable voters left in the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
This is a group of gettable voters. I mean, it's kind of unorthodox for a Democratic candidate to think, I need to spend part of my last 2 weeks going after Republican voters. But they're available because, as you mentioned, you know, kind of the grassroots support from Republicans who can't vote for Trump again. And up there also were about 100 former members of Congress, at least on the email chains that I saw, that could or couldn't make it, that represent districts across the country. I mean, this was not just your Kinzinger-Cheney event, and it shouldn't be. This was your Vice President Harris event, because right now she's the most powerful voice to either never Trumpers, soft Republicans, pro-democracy Republicans, whatever you want to call them. And in some ways, I think we're beginning to see, again, this sounds unorthodox, the closing message from the two candidates. because as much as Vice President Harris has talked about policy and wants this race to be about policy, many voters want to vote on reproductive freedom and other issues. This race is really about Donald Trump and whether or not he's a danger to the nation and what happens if he returns. And the vice president is realizing that as well. And it seems odd to make it simply about the Donald Trump brand and the danger of Donald Trump. But if your most gettable voters are actually Republicans who disagree with you on policy but want to protect the country, Donald Trump's also giving us his closing message. That there are enemies within that he's going to round up with the U.S. military. I feel very good about that contrast if I'm Vice President Harris going into these last 2
Yeah,
weeks.
because now that he's expanded enemies within, he was talking about immigrants, particularly non-white immigrants who wants to round up and put in camps. Oh, apparently Adam Kinzinger is on the list, as well as Speaker Pelosi. You and I, Robbie, were together earlier today at Brookings because the question of what is available to Vice President Harris, I think, is relevant and germane because we live in a country where, just to quote some of the new poll, Public Religion Research Institute, I always say is my favorite polling outfit. You guys are, because you guys do real great numbers, not like the sort of trash polls that we sometimes see dumped into the marketplace. I like to talk about that here. PRRI survey, your New American Values survey. Support for political violence. Let's put it up on the screen. A third of Republicans supporting political violence. Whether or not society has become too soft and feminine. 73%, three-quarters of Republicans saying that and saying that's a problem in the country. Immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, something we never thought we'd hear an American president say. Look at the number of Republicans who agree with that statement. And I will even note that some of the people who agree with that statement included almost a quarter of Jewish voters, 19% of Black Protestants, Mormon voters, a third of them. And then my last one here, whether or not undocumented migrants should be rounded up and put into militarized encampments, 79% of Republicans. What's even available to Vice President Harris outside of core Democrats?
Yeah, well, first let me say, as you know, I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, and there are questions that we have had to write during the Trump era as social scientists that I never thought we would have to write. So to write that question and put it on a public opinion survey and say, we actually need to know what the American people think about this statement, that whether immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, right? It's just, I think we should just pause for a minute and say how astonishing that is. And so even I look at these numbers all the time, and it is astonishing to me that, we need to know the answer to that question. But that's where we are in the country today. And you said it's 6 in 10 Republicans, one of our two political parties. And this is, as you said, you've already used the word Nazi. And we're all taught to kind of not be knee-jerk and kind of use the Nazi analogy. But
Hitler ad absurdum is the term. If you start using Hitler, you're losing.
Right. But poisoning the blood, Mein Kampf uses the word blood 150 times, right? That's Hitler's word, right? And it's almost always used in this way, this kind of idea of purity and defilement, contamination, and it's a politics of disgust that we're really seeing here. So it's really challenging when you see this argument, and we've got, again, 6 in 10 Republicans, for this, also in violence, right? A third, 1 in 3. Republicans saying we may have to resort to violence to save the country. That's the place that we're in. So, but I do think there's this, that back to your original point, is that I do think that one of the biggest contrasts we're seeing is we never saw Donald Trump saying, I will be a president for all Americans. Right. We never saw that. I think back in 2016, people thought, he'll pivot once he gets elected and we'll hear him. But then we heard that inauguration address, right, when he was first elected. And it was exactly what we're getting now, right? It was apocalypse, and it was, I am the president for the people who elected me, and that's it. And I think one of the things we're seeing for Harris is her saying exactly the opposite. I want to be a president for all Americans.
Well, so here's the question then. I mean, you are the numbers guy, and I want both you guys to answer this question. If we live in a country where 60% of self-identified Republicans essentially believe what Hitler believed, right, in terms of people should be rounded up, they're poisoning our blood, how is this country governable by somebody like Vice President Harris, as much as she is reaching out and saying everyone here? She refused to take the bait from Bret Baier, who wanted to try to get her to insult Trump's supporters. She wouldn't do it. Yeah. But she then would have to, if she wins, govern a country in which percentages of people at that level believe those kinds of things. How does that work?
It wasn't that long ago that we had bipartisan support for immigration reform in this country, right? But Trump has really taken the Republican Party on this journey, and he's pulled people with him. I do think that means, though, if we get Trump out of the kind of stoking that fire, we may see some of that come back. I mean, even 8 years ago, we had a majority of Republicans supporting a pathway to citizenship in this country.
Quaint times.
Down to 36%.
We have known each other a very long time. It's your first time on this program, and I'm nervous about that.
Oh, dear.
You know, at first I thought when they said, you know, when it's just, I thought, oh, yeah, I've known her forever. This will be fine. What we just heard today in two places, one on Fox, which was a stunning thing to watch, but then also in Pennsylvania, two versions of this candidate. In complete control of her message and what she wants to deliver in Pennsylvania, and then fighting back misinformation on Fox. What are you seeing in this candidacy as you watch it at this stage?
What I'm seeing is a person who has the character, the values, the temperament, the discipline to be an absolutely first-class president. And that's what I want the American people to see as well, Lawrence. You know, you gave these two examples. Her speech in Pennsylvania, right on the point where George Washington crossed the Delaware, and she reminded us of that heroic fight for our liberty. She covered all of the important points about the danger that someone who doesn't believe in our Constitution, doesn't believe in the rule of law, doesn't believe in the kind of fundamental values that we hold dear in our country, and that Washington crossed that Delaware in order to wage a revolution and achieve. And then on Fox, she stood up for herself. She didn't take any of the sort of foxiness rhetoric that came from Bear. And she was able to make her points despite every effort to undermine her and talk over her. She's exactly the kind of person that I want to be president.
You know, we had a minute to talk privately. I know you well enough to know you're really enthusiastic about her. Now, here's what else I know. No matter who the Democratic nominee would be, you'd be sitting here.
Yes.
And you'd be pushing that nominee. And you have done it for every Democratic nominee that you can help, and you always will. But you're really personally enthusiastic.
I am so excited about her candidacy. I've known her a long time. Her sister actually worked for me in the 2016 campaign, so I know the family. I did everything I could to help her as vice president. You know, vice president is a tough position for anybody. Here she was, our first woman vice president, coming in during COVID, for heaven's sakes. It was such a complicated time. And I know how well prepared she is, and most importantly, how profoundly she loves and wants to serve this country. And so when the change came and President Biden made that really selfless, patriotic decision to step down and endorsed her, I immediately followed suit and endorsed her. And I think she's run a nearly flawless campaign. She was thrown into the deep end, and she had a great convention. She wiped the floor with Trump in the debate. I could not be more excited.
The New York Times account of that day is you're on Martha's Vineyard. By the way, I was on Martha's Vineyard, too, and I had to rush back, too. You're on Martha's Vineyard, and your husband gets a phone call from the Vice President of the United States. Shortly after that, you get a phone call from the Vice President of the United States. It's not a package deal with her. These are two different individuals who she wants to speak to. You both decided faster than anyone to endorse her. What was that decision about?
It was about a couple of things. First of all, it followed Joe Biden's endorsement.
Yes.
And I thought she had earned it. I thought that she and only she had been on the ticket with him during the primary season. I knew that all the work that had been done in the Biden campaign to raise money would not go to anyone else but her, because she had been the running mate. And I also knew that some of the, you know, the wishful thinking and the speculating about let's have some sort of, you know, primary where people go on Lawrence's show and everybody watches them or something like that made absolutely no sense. That we didn't have the time, and it would not be in any way effective, and it would not help us win. So for reasons having to do with her and the fact that I thought she was eminently qualified, the process, the rules, and let's get to the convention and get off to the fall campaign, I didn't have a single doubt about endorsing her.
It's so reassuring for me to hear that from someone so wise about all of this process, because that was exactly my position. As I was saying, like this is a fantasy out there that you can go out and suddenly rush some kind of primary that would be decided at a convention.
Well, first of all, anybody who had any future ambitions, and we have a great bench of Democrats, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
And they didn't.
And they didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
As we go forward in this campaign, do you think there is a closing issue, a single issue that should be top of this campaign, or is top of the campaign?
I think that the vice president has kind of pivoted toward the closing argument, and the closing argument has two parts. The closing argument is, what kind of country do we want to be? What kind of people are we? Do we want to be divided? Do we want to be, set into arguments with each other that we can't ever agree on solving our problems? And she is qualified to bring our country together, and he is not. He is increasingly evidencing, as he did at that bizarre 39-minute on the stage, bopping to the songs that apparently he plays at Mar-a-Lago, he is unqualified to be president. He's unqualified by temperament. He's unqualified by behavior. He's unqualified by experience. He's unqualified by his agenda, the Project 2025 agenda. And so I think she's converging those two arguments. And really, that is the argument. I mean, people have to ask themselves, look, I may not agree with her. It's the kind of Liz Cheney argument. I may not agree with her on issues, but boy, do I agree with her that our democracy is at stake. I want to protect our freedom and our rights and the rule of law and everything we hold dear. She's our only choice. And guess what? Besides, he is increasingly unstable and unhinged. We have seen evidence of that, but now it's every day, Lawrence. It's every day. And he's increasingly threatening and dangerous. You were 100% right in your opening to point out he has threatened to put the American military in our streets, not only to deport people he thinks should be deported, but the rest of us who don't agree with him, who have a different view about what is the best interests of America. So I think it's a positive argument for her, but more importantly for our country, for our democracy, for our freedom. And it's a reminder of how dangerous he is.
Donald Trump's choice to outsource his get out the vote operations to Elon Musk means that Trump gets access to Elon Musk's millions, but that cash also comes with, shall we say, unorthodox methods of running a get out the vote operation. The Guardian reports that an app used by the Trump campaign and the Musk-backed America PAC to track paid canvassers' efforts to reach rural voters, that app keeps crashing in those very rural areas where internet service is often slow. As a result, the Trump campaign and America PAC then have little way to know whether canvassers are actually knocking on doors or whether they are cheating. Because remember, they are getting paid to do this work by Elon Musk. One political operative involved with the PAC said, maybe Elon Musk can give his canvassers a Starlink, which is a joke about Musk's satellite-based mobile internet router, but actually might not be a bad idea. Joining me now is Ben Wickler, chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Ben, thank you for being here. I said we need someone that really understands how you build a robust field operation and what it means to have paid canvassers and apps that don't work. Ben, I want to read, that person is you, Ben. I want to read you this quote from the Washington Post. Some of his early advisors on the super PAC warned Elon Musk he was trying to move too fast for such an ambitious political project, cautioning that it would require months more to properly hire and train the necessary staff. Musk declined to dilute his ambitions, appearing to believe that if we just run out there with clipboards and tell people what's at stake, they will be convinced. What alarms you most about the details we're learning about the Musk operation here, Ben?
I'll be totally honest. I'm delighted by learning these details about the Musk operation because these efforts are all trying to elect someone who would be a terrible, terrible president. So the fact that it's a total disorganized dumpster fire of a ground game on the Republican side is good news for democracy. It's good news for freedom. It's good news for any working family that doesn't want to be slapped with a $4,000 Trump tax, because they're not going to be able to turn out those last few voters that could tip an election that is basically tied in states like Wisconsin.
But to be kind of very elementary about it, walk me through, what an effective field operation looks like and what we're hearing about here.
Absolutely. I'll say tonight I was in Grant County in southwestern Wisconsin. There were 25,000 voters there in the 2020 election. And in Grant County, we've been organizing continuously, going back to the spring of 2017 at the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. The chair before me launched organizing programs. I worked to scale them up. We've been building out a team of volunteers that knows every inch of that county, every inch of Platteville, every inch of Cuba City, all over that county. We have local folks who've been going door to door, building relationships with their neighbors. Some of them use paper and clipboards. Others have the Minivan app on their phones, which allows you to sync when you do have internet access and save the data when you don't have internet access, so it doesn't crash the way apparently the Republican app does. It takes time. A lot of the volunteers who are doing this are older folks who are not familiar with the technology, or they're new volunteers for whom the idea of going up to a stranger and talking to them about politics can be scary. So you want to go out the first time with someone who's already done this before. But you build the strength, you build the practice, especially you do it in a local election, and then you do it in the big presidential election. You get better and better at it. None of that is happening in the Elon Musk America PAC operation. And the field operation, it's not going to turn a close race into a landslide, but it can give you that extra half a point that is what tips an election in a state like Wisconsin. And that's where having glitch after glitch with an untested operation, it's like getting into a Tesla that's supposed to drive itself that then slams into the wall of the parking garage. This is not what you want to see in a presidential campaign.
Well, that's a very apt metaphor, Ben. Talk to me a little bit about, I'm very interested, and I sort of belabored the point about the ground game because I agree with you. In terms of the margins, which is what this race is going to be won on, this could be the difference maker, right? This could be the difference between Donald Trump in the White House, Kamala Harris in the White House. In terms of these volunteers who are paid, hired by Elon Musk, a guy with no political experience, and are still being hired less than 3 weeks to go, what does that tell you about the quality of the argument they are going to be making to these low propensity voters who are apparently the target of the Trump campaign in terms of winning this race?
There's a lot of research that it's not just the number of doors you knock, it's the quality of the conversation that you have, your ability to engage, to listen, to be able to speak to the issues that people care about. If folks who are watching this right now who feel strongly about this, you can get involved. Go to wisdems.org/volunteer or chip in at wisdems.org/donate. When you volunteer, you will know what issues Kamala Harris actually stands for. You'll practice the script of things you're going to say. You're going to walk people through the process of making a plan to vote. If you're hiring people willy-nilly at the last second who may not actually support your candidate and sending them out, they're just not going to do a very good job of actually hitting the points that move the votes. Having a commitment to actually generating victory is critical in the final stretch. And all over Wisconsin, I'm hearing from people that they're getting door hangers left on their doors, but the America PAC paid canvassers not actually knocking on the door and talking to people. They're just trying to cross that house off the list, if they're even doing that. There's a big difference between leaving something on someone's doorstep and having an honest face-to-face conversation with them about the issues they care about the most. And that's why we work so hard to build a field operation that builds authentic conversations and relationships with voters and treats them with respect instead of treating them as a paycheck, essentially. And I wish the best of luck to all the folks who are on the payroll at America PAC. Feel free to speak from your heart if you think that Harris would be a better presidential candidate. But I think there's a questionable strategy from the Trump campaign on the ground game this year.
Ben Wickler, encouraging all America PAC volunteers or paid staff to just go ahead and leave the brochures at the doorstep. Don't bother talking. No problem there. Thank you for joining me, Ben. It's great to hear from you.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Today, VP Harris made a play for people who have voted for Republicans. Do you think this strategy is working? Is this the kind of critical work she should be doing in the last few days?
100%. Listen, I really feel in the last 48 hours like the political wheel has turned and shifted. It was a terrific performance. Let me just read you a quote about it. She was combative and energetic and certainly landed some blows on Donald Trump. That was Brit Hume, Fox reporter. Let me give you another one. She had a mission. She wanted to go after Donald Trump and create a viral moment. She may have gotten that. That was from Bret Baier, the guy who did the reporter who did the interview. The most important thing, Stephanie, is she looks strong and confident. Whether or not the viewers, whether or not she changed any viewers' minds on Fox is really not even relevant. The point is that she went into the lion's den confident and strong. And even if you disagree with her, being wrong and strong, as Clinton said, is better than being weak and right. And right now, she looks strong and Trump looks weak.
Let's talk about this interview, because people are going to see whatever they want to see out of it. But what she showed is that she's capable and she's unafraid. And what is Donald Trump doing this week? Only interviews and forums with a very friendly audience. He's dancing on stage for 39 minutes. He's canceling on 60 Minutes. He's canceling on CNBC, and he's turning down the debate.
Right. He is trying to, it's interesting what he's trying to do. He's trying to both be within his comfort zone and yet also show that he's willing to break out, but not really being good at it. It's fascinating. When he went on Univision to try to win over a Latino audience, he did so by trying to soften his tone on immigration, saying, oh, we want legal immigrants only, trying to appeal to a swath of the Latino community that thinks, oh, well, my people came over illegally. Why isn't everyone else? Why are Haitian migrants that I'm hearing about, or as Trump tries to pit communities against each other? But legal immigration fell under his watch. People who advise him, like Stephen Miller, are against lots of forms of legal immigration. They only want immigration from certain parts of the world, namely Europe. So for him to claim that he's in favor of legal immigration, to try to soften his tone, I'm hoping that it doesn't work, considering how much evidence we have to the contrary.
Victoria, let's first talk about that TV interview. The stunning or disheartening thing is people are going to hear, people are going to see whatever they want to see, no matter what happened in that interview. But what was your take?
She is battle tested. So to Mark's point, she went into the lion's den, and you may not agree with a word she said, but she was strong and she held her own. And you know what? Appearances matter. And we also know that voters also like to attach on to charisma, to strength, something that Donald Trump has touted, one of the reasons why he connects with people. And I think that with Kamala Harris, my other takeaway, aside from that, was she's getting angry. And I wanted to see that anger. I want joy, but I want anger. As humans, we all have a mix of emotion. And that joyousness that we saw during the convention is great, but we need to counter punch. We know that anxiety is something that is coming out of the Republican campaign, and Democrats need to be able to counter punch on that. So I think that bit of anger was the biggest take home for me.
Mark, you were a Republican for a very, very long time. You know Fox News very well. Watching that interview, thinking about the days of Roger Ailes, can you believe that here we are 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks before the election, and a black female vice president of the United States sat there on Fox News, maybe weeks away from becoming the next president? I mean, that's pretty extraordinary.
Listen, it would have been extraordinary 10 years ago in a less partisan time. But during an era when, that it's being sued left and right for being in the bag for Trump, the network is. And so it just showed enormous confidence and strength. And that's the most important perception the voters have as a president. All the campaigns I did for president, no matter where people are on the issues, the attribute, which is the most important thing that people vote on for president, is strength. So, that was Biden's problem, and a lot of it had to do with age, but he was seen as weak. Whatever you say about Kamala Harris, and today just reinforced it in so many ways, she is strong and unafraid, And so I think even a number of viewers in the Fox audience looked at that and said, wow, she's got a lot of moxie and no fear, which is what you want to see in a president.
Then, and we're going to move on, but then, Mark, what position does that put Donald Trump in, right? I keep hearing the words like confident, strong, unafraid, right? How boxed in is he, the kid who keeps canceling?
Yeah, well, that's why it's also really smart, because just psychologically, Trump was already going crazy about the fact that they even did the interview in the first place. And now that she did it and she did so well, that he's just going to be, circling the drain right now. And to your point, all he's doing are friendly audiences with handpicked Trump supporters. And he's made clear that he doesn't want to debate again. That shows weakness, not confidence. And so, that's why I said I just feel like the political ground is shifting right now. And again, Harris, to Victoria's point, is on offense, and I like it a lot. She's keeping the hammer down right when she needs to.
People were saying she was losing momentum. Well, she certainly picked it up today. Let's talk about this event that Trump had focused on women voters. At this event, he took credit for overturning Roe. He falsely called himself the father of IVF. And then he went on and on talking about how attractive he finds Senator Katie Britt. Victoria, are there any women persuadable voters that Donald Trump could possibly be winning over? Or the women who are voting for him going to vote for him no matter what he says? Because I'm watching him in that room thinking, is there anybody in there going, I'm in it now?
I think maybe there were a handful of women who were looking for a reason to justify why they would cast a vote for Donald Trump. Maybe they can hang their hat on the states' rights piece, right? So we know states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. And this was really what I took home from the Trump town hall with women, that it's not that he's necessarily against these rights, it's that it's not the federal government's business. The other thing that I thought was so interesting was how he was pulling in Ronald Reagan, right? So Ronald Reagan was the shield as well. So he was trying to soften, and I think for the couple of women who are looking for the excuse to say, I can still say I'm pro-choice or for women's reproductive rights, but I really want to vote for Trump, I think he gave them that during the town hall.
Hayes, I got two for you. The first, this event that VP Harris did with 100 Republicans in Pennsylvania. Do you think any of these moves risk her alienating those further on the left?
Honestly, yes. That is a risk that the Harris campaign has decided.
But where are they going to go?
That's the thing. They can stay home is the thing. The problem that Harris has right now is that she's trying to figure out what is her coalition, what is the slice of the electorate in these key states that I need to win. And getting to that point is what's most important right now for her. She's trying to figure out, okay, how do I balance the never Trump Republicans with the calls to address black men's economic concerns? How do I balance out talking about just straight the economy and inflation?
How do I win business people over without infuriating AOC and the threat of getting rid of Lena Khan?
Exactly. So she's trying to figure out where she can get her take losses and for what gains, and that is like the biggest math problem that they're trying to solve right now. This formula solving for X of how many voters they need to get a solid coalition to win.
What did you think of the point she made on Fox, where she made it clear? And I hadn't heard her be this clear on this point before, where she said her presidency would not be a continuation of Joe Biden's.
I make of it that she's trying to win this election. I think one of the things, no, I mean it. I think that one of the things that we've been seeing from the Harris campaign is win first, figure out everything else later. I remember seeing a quote just today. What is Kamala Harris's economic policy? People saying around her saying she doesn't really know what she is going to be doing once she's there, how she's going to change things up from Biden, what policies she is specifically going to pursue outside of those that have already been proposed. What
She
her economic
also doesn't
vision
need, okay,
is
we
going
have to remember, she's not running for president when we're in a time of economic crisis,
Yes.
right? We're in an economic recovery. Under the Biden-Harris administration, there have been 4 major pieces of legislation passed, all that are deeply tied to the economy. So it's hardly like we have a failing healthcare system where you need to rip it up and present Obamacare. We're not necessarily in need of that for people who are looking for these major moves.
And that's part of the challenge of her trying to make a sales pitch, is saying, well, I'm not going to be Biden, but things are going well. So how do you cross over those two things. She's doing her best right now to try and weave those two messages of change and continuity to the point that she can actually get to the White House and make a difference.
Mark McKinnon, Kamala Harris is focused on these Nikki Haley voters. How do you persuade these Nikki Haley voters? In my mind, the person who has the greatest probability of persuading those voters would be Nikki Haley herself. Where is she? She said she's voting for Donald Trump, but I don't see her on the campaign trail trying to help him.
No, listen, I think that she is playing a long game. And the long game that she's playing is that she thinks that if Donald Trump loses and loses badly, that she'll be standing there saying, I'm the resurrection. And she's not going to be the resurrection and she's not going to get those MAGA voters that she'll need to rebuild the Republican Party if she goes out and endorses Harris. But her voters get the trick. I mean, that's why 20% of them either voted for Haley or didn't vote for Donald Trump in those primaries. So that's a huge part of that electorate. And I think that gender gap that Harris has right now, which is up to 16 points right now, which is much stronger than Trump's male gender gap, is in part due to those Haley voters. I mean, Haley may be not taking the courageous route that a Liz Cheney is, but her voters are. Her voters are standing up even though she's sitting down.